ABA as a science of love and change, make a better world through science. If those phrases resonate with you, you are in the right place. Welcome to episode 137 of the Autism Outreach Podcast. We have an amazing show today. I had a great conversation with Dr. Shahla Alai-Rosales and Peggy Heinkel-Wolfe. It's a real pick-me-up, just a positive episode. These people are extremely positive in the field, and they really have a journey and a story to share. So I know when I was working in the trenches, seeing clients every day, sometimes you forget about your why because there's so many other things that you're thinking about. You're thinking about that meeting. You're thinking about that hard lawyer advocate that is hard for you to work with. There's so many things that come into play when we are working day in, day out with clients. So if you need a pick-me-up, you're in the right place. This is a great episode for you. So Shahla is a PhD, BCBAD, and a professor in the Department of Behavior Analysis at the University of North Texas, which, funny enough, that's where I did my coursework. And she's taught courses all over here and also in Europe and the Middle East on a variety of topics in the field. She's also served on several boards and committees. And she has more than 4 decades of experience working with families and has trained hundreds of behavior analysts. She's an associate editor for Behavior Analysis and Practice and is a co-author of Building and Sustaining Meaningful and Effective Relationships as a Supervisor and Mentor with LeBlanc and Sellers, and also a book that we discussed today that she co-wrote called Responsible and Responsive Parenting in Autism Between Now and Dreams. And so she co-wrote that with Peggy, and we have a great conversation. Peggy is an amazing person, and she wrote a book called See Sam Run, A Mother's Story of Autism. It was published in 2008, and she won the Mayborn Prize for Literary Nonfiction in 2005. She just has a wealth of information from her own personal experience, and they have a great conversation today with me all about responsible and responsive parenting and autism. But we talk about different parts of their book. We talk about these big ideas in the field. ABA as a science of love and change. We also talk about the power of loving, remembering our why, which I think is hard as a challenge when we're out in the field. And we also talk about one of my favorite topics, which is the power of connecting with a focus on reciprocity. So welcome to episode 137 of the Autism Outreach Podcast. I'm just so excited for you to dig on in to this episode.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Well, thanks so much for joining us on episode 137. We have an amazing episode for you today. We have with us Dr. Shahla Alai-Rosales and Peggy Heinkel-Wolfe. Thanks so much for joining us. It's amazing to have you on.
Well, thank you for having us.
I'm excited to learn more about you, your work, your relationship together, and all that great stuff. I have been reaching out to people that I want to have on the podcast. I'm always delighted. Actually, I think we connected on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is it is social media. I know people may not believe that because I think it's more professional than per se TikTok because I'm over there too. But I do love LinkedIn because there are just a lot of really smart professional people over there. And I have just made some really great relationships over there. So I think that's where we connected. But for those of us that are new to both of you, can you just tell us a little bit about you, kind of your journey into the autism world and all that great stuff?
Well, maybe I'll start since mine has been largely a professional journey. I think there's a lot of different ways into the field. But so professionally, also too, I should say, every time Peggy and I are asked our origin stories, a lot of it depends on the vantage point at the moment and what is most salient. But I guess what I'll say today is most salient is I started in child and family studies. I had worked with Head Start. I have always been interested and children and families and culture. And part of that is because of my own life and the world that I lived in. But I ended up at Southern Illinois University for my undergraduate degree, which at the time was a very strong program in behavior analysis and applied behavior analysis. This was in the 80s.
Is it were you a Saluki? Is that
I was a Saluki,
okay.
Yes.
My nephew, Christian Donatelli, runs track there. So I know the Salukis. I'm very proud of him. He's very cute. Okay. I digress. Sorry. I don't know people that talk about that.
Phenomenal school.
Yeah.
And I didn't go there for the programs in behavior analysis, but I was so fortunate. My first seminar I went to was Don Baer. He was visiting and he gave a talk about something about behavior analysis. And I remember thinking, and then I remember thinking, this is kind of like that book I read. And in high school, I had read Walden 2, which was like one of Skinner's very early books. And it was post-World War II. And he had this idea of how to make a better world. And how to make a better world through science. And so I sort of linked those two things. And then I was working with the Head Start in Carbondale at SIU. And I also, I had to work through school, and I was Sandra Lutzker's secretary in the university daycare. It was called Rainbow's End. And and the rest is sort of history, because Dr. John Lutzker and Sandra Lutzker took me under their wing, and they are phenomenal humans and behavior analysts. And John actually developed a program called Project 12 Ways, which was a program for families, and it was taking an eco-behavioral approach to behavior change. So anyway, they told me Kansas was the place to go. So I went there for my master's degree and my PhD, and started working with typically developing children or children with no known diagnoses. And during that time, Lovas's data was published. Well, there were two studies published. One was from the Princeton Child Development Institute, showing just these phenomenal changes with children with autism. And then Lovas's data, which was very controversial, but that came out. And our project, we started a project at KU. It was the ECAP, the Early Childhood Autism Project. And we'd initially started out as a replication of UCLA, but my advisors had some pretty strong values around positive behavioral supports. It wasn't called that at the time, but and about not using aversives in intervention. This was in the 80s. In fact, one of my advisors, Dr. Barbara Edsel, testified in Washington. They had this big gathering, and she talked about how there were alternatives. So we had that strong value. And we also had a strong value about community and inclusion. And so we still maintained a relationship with the UCLA project because they were producing incredible outcomes, but we wanted to approach it in a slightly different way. So I was with that project for many years until I finished my PhD and then got the position here. And here I focus largely on working with children with autism and their families and working with under-resourced populations, and under-resourced for a variety of reasons. But anyway, that's a short answer.
I love it. I love that. I love learning about everybody's story is a little bit different. So that is really, that's exciting. What about you, Peggy?
I enter the picture about the moment in Shahla's story when she says, "And then I came here."
Okay. Right. Enter Peggy.
The last 30, we've been friends for 30 years, and the last 30 years got about 30 seconds of chatter there, but
yeah, I'll let you pick up on that because we did a lot of stuff.
we did. As I mentioned, Shahla and I have been friends for 30 years, and it's so fun to hear her tell her origin story because she never tells it the same, and she's always blowing my mind with something that she did or was connected to. It's almost like Forrest Gump moments or something. But yeah, I'm a parent and I'm a writer, and I didn't train as a writer. I trained as a musician, but came into writing and was really fortunate to have one of my. I was just messing around. I was writing a memoir of my son's first 4 or 5 years of life. He was diagnosed with autism in the early 90s. And that was accepted for publication. So I was really lucky about that. And then, but Shahla and I
interject. Not only was it accepted for publication, but it won a Mayborn Award, which is a big deal in the journalism literary world.
Amazing.
So she won an award. It's a beautiful book.
Thank you, sweetie. Yes, it will come out okay. But anyways, but at that point, Shahla and I had known each other, and she's sort of my touchstone. She never really worked directly with Sam, but she was my touchstone in our journey. And at one point, she shared with me, I'd always been interested in science writing. I think you find certain truths when you take science and explain it in plain language. Yeah. I think sometimes it's even revealing to scientists to hear their work explained in plain language. So when she was showing me something she was working on, I just said, "Oh God, we have got to do this for parents and people." It was not really a decision-making matrix because that's not how Shahla thinks, but it was a framework that was really important for ethical decision-making. And and then we took it from there.
I love that. Well, that's interesting that you trained as a musician, became a writer. That was what you were passionate about. And I know that you have written a book together, and it did come across my desk, I think, because I think it's sold through many places, but Different Roads to Learning is Julie, who is the owner of that. She's been a big cheerleader and fan of mine since I just had an idea for a therapy product 7 years ago. So I really love Julie. So you have written this book called Responsible and Responsive Parenting and Autism Between Now and Dreams. And so were you inspired? I guess, how long were you guys kind of friends before you decided that you were going to work on this collaborative project together? It's a big undertaking, I can imagine.
I'd have to do the math.
We've been friends for 30 years. And I will have to say, from the beginning, I think our friendship has been characterized by not everyday goings on, right, but incredibly deep and substantive conversations periodically. And, we both have families. We both have been working. We both had, a lot of life tests. So our periods of friendship have sort of been these like wonderful, heavily imbued periods, through time. So I would say that in some ways the book started in a parking lot in Argyle, maybe.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Having a conversation about big pictures, about what it meant to learn. I remember a discussion about, I think I was telling them, meaning Peggy and her husband, and telling them how I like to learn, like really different things. Like I was learning a new language or learning calculus or whatever it is, because it always kept me with a strong reference point for working with the kids that I worked with, that taking something that is incredibly different and hard does a good job with perspective taking. And then they talked about that, and they talked about the multiple perspectives and how they've been very with no borders, I think, in terms of looking at the things that would support Sam and help him flourish. So I think, maybe in a parking lot 30 years ago. However, we started technically maybe writing the book a little over 10 or 12 years ago, because we gave this talk for Texas Parent to Parent, which is Parent to Parent is a phenomenal organization and a really important one. And Peggy has always been very involved with it. And we gave a talk there about decision making. And I think at that point, Peggy said, this should be a book. So we kept talking, but again, we were both doing many things. And so we would get together in my office at her kitchen table, at the botanical gardens, and we would talk through different concepts and points. But I think that the inspiration, and Peggy always laughs when I say this, but I think a lot of the inspiration was we're sort of in grandmother positions right now. And I think that for me, it's an act of grandmotherly love that we wrote the book. Kind of like, how does it look from this vantage point? And what information might we share? Not so much to tell people how to do things, because I don't think we do very much of that in the book, but we tell them these are the things that you should think about. These are some of the values that can get lost. These are some of the values that that are your strengths, that are your superpowers as a parent, so we explore a lot of that. I don't know. What would you add, Peggy? Or
Well, I'm laughing less at the grandmotherly thing because I am going to be a grandmother. So I always sort of chuckle. It's like, okay, I'm not a grandmother yet, and I'm not pushing for it. But anyways, yeah. Shahla does this so eloquently. I always kind of just sit back and go, you go, girl. The only other thing I like to sort of tell folks, because for some reason this is important to me, she makes it sound easy. It was not easy. There was a lot of distillation that happened. That brain of hers is so full of science and frameworks and paradigms and paradigm shifts that there was no way I was going to be able to distill it. So I would take notes when she was saying things, and then I would react and share some of our experiences. That is how some of my family's experiences got in this book, because Shahla would help give them meaning, which I'm so grateful for. But on the wall of my breakfast room was pages and pages of conversation notes. And I would start cutting and moving things around so that it was a very organic process to take that decision-making framework and boil it down to learning, loving, and connecting.
Yeah, I like how it was in the 3 parts. It's so neat to have somebody to work on something with, and then to see your idea come to, fruition is exciting. And so in the book, you describe ABA as a science of love and change, which I like that. But can you tell or share more about that statement? I think that's a powerful statement.
Yeah, we do too. I think that's one of our favorite things. And I have to say, Peggy, you said something earlier about how science writing, I find science writing magical. Like, it really does help you understand things in a different way you didn't understand them before, especially when you try to explain it in lay terms and understand what are the basic mechanisms, what are the foundational principles behind this bit of science. And I think that Peggy is so complimentary to me, but I really feel like there was incredible synergy in doing this. And I think the science and love was part of our incredible synergy. I think that I learned to look at my science in a new way. I learned to look at the process of how we look at behavior change in a different way than I had before Peggy and I had the conversations and wrote all these words.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that probably there are a couple of really fundamental things in the book that I just love. And this idea of science and love, it is that ABA is a science of love and change, is, first of all, in applied behavior analysis, we learn about how behavior works by actually changing behavior.
Mm-hmm.
That is a kind of different characteristic of our particular science. But the other thing is, in applied behavior analysis, there has to be deep concern and care for the people whose behavior is undergoing change. And that turns out to be very complicated. Because we're humans, we all have different perspectives about what care means, about what love means, about what honorable love means. All those things end up being in some ways more complicated than the actual behavior change procedures. But even those procedures, as we know from listening to people in the autistic world, people of different cultures and backgrounds, part of the non-dominant culture, sometimes the behavior change procedures themselves are uncomfortable or unwelcome. And so, but I always, from the moment I entered the field, and again, I was so lucky to work with the Lutzkers, from the moment I entered the field, I think one thing I understood is those two also always have to be your advisors. Like the science and understanding and arranging the conditions so there's evidence, so you reduce ambiguity, but also the love and the care for the individual you're working with and for humanity at large. Like those two were never separated in the way that I was initially trained. And so I think that I love that you picked that as the first concept to talk about, because I think that is threaded throughout the whole book. And a lot of what we explore in the book is how to harmonize the process of change with your deep regard for humanity, human rights, and the individual you're responsible for.
Yeah, I love that. And we used to always say dignity over data. I used to work at the Cleveland Clinic, has a place called the Learner School. That's where I first learned about ABA. But, I think it's hard. Well, I love that because I'm a speech therapist and BCBA. And I don't know if you know, but speech therapists, a lot of them don't like ABA and in fact are very anti-ABA. So having an online business, it just kind of erodes. You're like, oh my gosh. So I do a lot of sharing and disseminating about just this is what ABA can look like, because I think people either they met one BCBA or maybe they meet somebody who's maybe doesn't have this focus, just on overall positivity. I do think it's hard in the field. So sometimes, with RBTs who maybe aren't trained appropriately, who aren't sure how to handle kids who are, little. And like sometimes I'll be doing a consult with a 2.5-year-old and the kid is not happy. And I'll be like, do you guys have any bubbles like in the clinic? I am a mom of 3 too. So I'm kind of like utilizing all my SLP, BCBA mom brain. But, I think there's things that we just we forget the whole picture, they forget and I like this idea with this focus on, that's my next question, reciprocity, because I talk a lot, we're an ASH and ACE provider, and I do a lot of talk about joint attention and social engagement. And, I have questions from BCBAs about not understanding. The way I talk about joint attention is working on like a shared activity. It's like we can't make, and I've coached parents on this too, because they'll have other providers will be like, well, you sit and we do this. And it's like, they're 3. Okay. So, I love this idea of that line, but then the focus on reciprocity, because I don't think everybody has that strong background. And so the way that ABA is applied or people are utilizing it may not look, the same. And so I think it's good to talk about these things. So you do talk about the power of connecting with a focus on reciprocity, which I'm sure comes from your training and background too. But can you talk a little bit about how that's important, or maybe what that might look like for you when you're working with an autistic learner?
I want to start that. Yeah, you start that, Peggy.
Start with one thing. It's just like I feel like the most important thing you have to do with your kid is respond to them. They're going to lay out what they need, lay out what they want. They're exploring the world. Their play is how they explore the world. Mm-hmm. And you just have to respond to that. And if you have the big picture in mind, I know I feel like I'm oversimplifying this in a room full of smart people, but you know, the big picture when Sam was 3 was pretty singular. I'm glad we're talking to a speech therapist. It was getting him to talk. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I set up the sandbox and we did it a really special way where it was on feet. This was not something he was going to sit in, but mm-hmm. he wanted to do the manipulation and he wanted to add the water and he wanted to move things around. And so I just sat next to him as he's in the sandbox and did little verbal prompts for little things. And the next thing you know, I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but I had some training from a really good speech pathologist who showed me how to prompt his speech. And all I was doing, honest to God, was responding to him. That's mm-hmm. all I was doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which that responsiveness is an art. Mm-hmm. And it's a science. Like there's a science of responsiveness, mm-hmm. which I think you had and have many of those prerequisite skills, and you had really lovely coaching along the way. And I think part of our desire to write about all of this was to help parents understand what goes into that, from understanding child development and like what 2-year-olds like to do, and even what most 2-year-olds don't like to do, like collecting string, or you know, but right. but how you can start wherever your child is. Mm-hmm. And expand and not contract their world. I think that's one of the other big messages is expand, expand, expand. Don't contract. And that reciprocity, I think Peggy talked about this as circles in the book, like when we were writing, but reciprocity is this series of circles that applies for you and your child, and the responsiveness. It applies for you and the rest of the family. It applies for your community. You know, it's reciprocity is a very basic human thing. It's how we survive and thrive, like that reciprocity. So working on that with your child and working on that in your own circles is really fundamental for both you, your child, and your community. One of my favorite stories in the book, and I would like Peggy to maybe share it. She knows which one it is. It's a story of Connie, and it's a lot about reciprocity. I don't know if you want to. Yeah, it really is quite. There's a lot of beautiful stories, but that one definitely is my favorite. I don't know if you want to give a little synopsis of it.
Connie was the lady who cut Sam's hair. So when kids are really young, they don't tolerate that so well. Mm-hmm. And it's the story of Connie has a little bit of a backstory about Sam's tolerance to hair cutting. But when we first moved to Texas, I was a little worried I wasn't going to find the beautiful next door neighbor that helped us get over the hump of me cutting his hair when he was asleep. And people stop me in the store and say, "Son, you need a new barber." But yeah, right. Anyways, yeah, at first, you know, Sam would talk to Connie and direct her, you know, hold my hair like this, cut it like that. So, and, you know, Connie
she would do it.
She would do it. She was a grandma. She got it. She was a grandma. And then eventually he stopped telling her, and they just started talking about whatever was the thing to talk about. So that long-term relationship that that evolved and could be counted on, and went back and forth. I mean, Connie was paid for her services. Don't get me wrong about that, but that was incidental to their relationship.
Oh.
And you all went and got your hair cut.
Yes.
At her salon. Yeah, they all went to her salon.
Yep.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, I was just I do some international consults, but I was just talking to a family last night and we were talking about nail clipping and hair cutting. I mean, because, it's really hard. And those are just things that I think if you're not raising an autistic child, you don't realize how hard that is, and trying to find somebody that, you're comfortable with, your child's comfortable with. And those may seem like small things to other people, but that's really such a big part. And then that person was a big part of your life. I love that. That's really nice. It sounds like those are inspiring stories. And goes to the last point is, which I can tell, I love this interview because you guys are both so positive. I need this in my life. But you talk about highlight the power of loving, which I think is so important and so positive, because I guess I really struggle with that because I'm online, with my online business. A lot of parents might unknowingly ask about ABA in a parent group. And, maybe they meet the wrong person who just has picked up on this, anti-ABA. And so I think a lot of parents are really kind of questioning, what intervention is best for my child, what can help them. But I like that idea to talk about the power of loving. So I guess how can we as clinicians kind of incorporate, this idea of your overall positivity is so great. But what are some take homes, let's say that we're doing an intake and maybe we meet a new family at our clinic for the first time. Are there things that might help us kind of build this, as you call it, like circle this connection with families? Because I think that can be, I know, with my own kids, and I don't have an autistic child, but, I've had my kids have had other medical issues where I've met other medical providers and they're not callous, but they don't realize, like, for me, this is a big deal because it's my child. But when you're with parents that are going through this every day, I think you kind of get, I don't know if the word's callous, but it's kind of like routine for the professional. I mean, not me, but for other people, because when you're in the trenches, it's a hard job, right? What we do. So what are some ideas? And two, from the parental perspective, like what makes a clinician come off as kind and friendly? Because I know a lot of BCBAs get a bad rap for not being kind and friendly. So what can we do? What can we do to be more positive?
Oh, that's a hard question, because you have to be, for this to work, it has to come from a genuine place. So I think the first thing you have to do is maybe check on your own origin story. We're going to do a little circle here and remember why you're doing this work in the first place. And also that probably the most important thing you have to give to someone else is your time. So would we get paid for our time? You start thinking about your time in a different way. But you can give your time, and when you do, it's noticed. So I think you have to remember why you're doing the work, and that the most important thing you're offering is your time. You've got a skill set, and you've got talents, and you've got other resources at your disposal. But the thing that really has value is your ability to stop and take a breath and listen. I was stunned the day that my son was diagnosed that they filled that room with people, and that this was in Syracuse, New York. I was not, just sent on my way. They were listening and talking, and here's this person, and here's this person, and here's this. I didn't live in Syracuse. It was like, okay, thank you very much.
Right. Good to know. Noted.
Getting in the car and driving back to Rochester, but okay. But we spent some time, and they spent some time, and that grounded me at a moment when I could have easily just flung far, far away. So I think offering that time also gives parents a chance to find their footing and tap their own strengths and talents. You have to be with them in order for that to happen. So, man, we just got to see each other. We just have to see each other.
I think too, what you said, Peggy, about like your own, first of all, that it has to be genuine, because the truth is, if you pretend to be caring or compassionate and you're not feeling that, I think it actually has a worse effect, because it comes off as sort of like a scary clown face or something.
Therapy voice. Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
So, but I think that means, in behavior speak, it's like the reinforcer control has to be the right reinforcer control.
Right.
Like you have to recheck why you're doing it, why you're there. And it has to be every moment you walk into a room with a child or with a family. Like you need that moment of, why am I here? What is my purpose? How do I want to walk into this? And what does love mean in this context? I think one of the problems with the love word is that in our society, it's so tied to sexuality. And it's like, there's a whole lot of other love besides that one. Not that that one's not good and important and everything, but but love is so big. And it is the animating force of life. And so I think part of this whole thing is you really have to be in touch with where you are in space and what you're bringing and what that means. And it is a process. It is a becoming. It's not a one and done kind of thing that you put on a checklist. Okay, I got love and then move on. Or I have care, check. It is a constant recalibration of who you are with this being in front of you, the child or the family. And communication is a big part of loving. And look at all around us, dialogue is hard. Dialogue, when someone doesn't have words, is even more difficult. But it means it's even more important to learn how to connect and learn how to bring that awe and that respect and that dignity for whoever it is that you're with, and time. Like that is huge. You can't run through a checklist and run out the door. Like that's not how to do an assessment with a family. That's not how to see who this little child is in front of you and how the two of you can be on a journey to expand life for both of you. Because usually when you expand it for a child, you expand something in your own being also.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I think that's good. I think maybe we need affirmations, like phrases that we say, because I think that is hard. Sometimes I just think the way that the world is and how busy our field is and how much it's grown, sometimes I think it's hard for people to be just present in the moment. Present in the therapeutic moment is something that I talk about a lot. So, I mean, I'm feeling inspired for my next therapy session later today. So, well, thank you so much for joining us. And where can people find out more about you and your work? This book is available, I know, on Different Roads to Learning. Is it available on Amazon and through other distributors as well?
Yes. And we set up a little website with some other resources, and it's really hard, betweennowandreams.com.
Okay. Oh, nice. You got the URL. I love it. That never happens. Okay. Well, thank you so much for both coming on. It was really great. It was really great to meet and talk with you.
Thanks for
Thank you for having us. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.